Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today at this conference to mark the IPPR's Scotland's 10th anniversary. And I want to begin by reflecting on the role of organisations like IPPR Scotland and events such as this. But to do so, I want to take our collective minds back, not 10 years, but 30 years, to the period immediately before the creation of the Scottish Parliament and its emergence into our national life. My memory of that time is of a period of political debate and disagreement, as passionate and as heated as today, yes, but at a deeper level, also the emergence of a shared diagnosis of the fundamental problem that Scotland was facing, and from that also an ever-strengthening sense of common purpose. There was widespread recognition that the political priorities and the underlying political philosophy that drove Thatcherism, with all the damage it caused to our economy and our society, was not what we wanted or needed as a nation. At that time, Westminster was taking Scotland in a direction that we did not seek, and therefore a consensus emerged that a parliament here in Scotland was now necessary to protect us and all that we valued, and more positively, to give us the opportunity to walk a different path. Scottish solutions for Scottish problems would sum up the mood. And of course, people holding similar roles to all of you in the room today, came together to make devolution, to make self-government happen for Scotland. People knew that mere discontent with the status quo was not enough. Something more than anger and frustration was needed. So the intellectual work was done, the arguments constructed, the practical steps taken to produce a blueprint for our Parliament by our trade unions, by individuals and organisations across Civic Scotland and by politicians as well. Scotland saw both the threat and the opportunity. We learned the lessons from a decade and more of powerlessness in the face of Thatcherism, and we came together in an unprecedented way. I remind us of this part of Scotland's journey for two reasons. First, because as I think we can all see, a new threat to so much of what we value is emerging. The drift to the right that is consuming Westminster politics demonstrates that. Therefore, I ask whether the Parliament we thought would be our protection is in fact strong enough. And second, if we decide that the answer to that question is no, as I do, then I hope that people in this room, people throughout Scotland, and organisations like IPPR Scotland will have a crucial part to play in bringing us together behind a shared vision of the society we believe Scotland can and should be, the economy we can and should have. Laying the intellectual foundations, and I think of IPPR Scotland's ongoing work on a partnership model for governance here in Scotland, but also being willing to put in the hard yards together to make sure that our Parliament is strong enough to turn that shared vision into reality. Immediately after this session today, you'll be discussing the question, how healthy is Scotland's democracy? The Scottish Parliament sits at the very heart of Scotland's democracy. But if we look at the experiences of this past decade, with the devolution settlement consciously and deliberately undermined by the Internal Market Act, with the throwing to one side of the convention that Scottish consent is required for Westminster to legislate in devolved areas, and with creeping direct Westminster intervention in devolved policy areas, then I say with absolute confidence that our Parliament is not strong enough to protect us from a government led by the likes of Nigel Farage. Indeed, a Parliament without the power to call a constitutional referendum is a Parliament without the means necessary to defend itself, to defend our country and what we value from what would be the most damaging and divisive Westminster government since Margaret Thatcher. In the session before this, you asked whether Scotland can be a better country. My answer to that is not only yes, we can, but importantly, yes, we must. You will have heard, I'm sure, powerful contributions this morning from people setting out the fiscal and demographic challenges that our nation faces, and these are real. They are a product of Scotland's position as a regional economy of the United Kingdom, limited in what we can achieve by strategic policy choices made in Westminster. Choices that are not about giving Scotland a competitive advantage, that are not about Scotland's specific needs or circumstances. They are a product of our past and a clear part of our present reality, but they do not need to define our future. As a national economy, with a full range of economic levers in our hands and the ability to make strategic choices that meet head-on the challenges that Scotland faces, while making the most of our nation's many opportunities, Scotland's trajectory can shift. The work done by the Scottish Government and by IPPR Scotland, looking at the successes of comparable countries, enables us to address the important point: Scotland can be wealthier, fairer, happier and healthier, just like these comparable countries. At a fundamental level, countries like Denmark or Ireland or Finland have no advantage in terms of natural resources or natural wit and capacity over Scotland. But what they do have is the golden combination of membership of the European Union and the policy flexibility of independence. Later today, you'll be debating another question: what is the strategy for Scotland's economy? That, my friends, is it in a nutshell: membership of the EU and the policy flexibility of independence, the ability to participate in the world's largest single market and design policies that work for our country. But Scotland is fortunate to be able to add one more ingredient to that golden combination. Scotland's own golden combination, and the foundation of any economic strategy, is restored membership of the EU. Brexit is a wrong, tragic mistake that our Parliament must have the power to fix. It is full self-government with independence. And it's the ability to ensure that Scotland's vast, low-cost renewable energy wealth delivers not only lower bills for households, but also a transformational competitive advantage for Scotland's economy, not only boosting businesses that are already here, but also drawing in the high-tech, energy-hungry industries of the future. Just as Ireland was able to pull the lever of low corporation tax to transform her economy over these decades, so too can Scotland pull the lever of low energy costs to transform our economy in the years and the decades to come. But to do so, we need that lever in Scotland's hands, not Westminster's. So I want a Parliament with the power to choose a return to membership of the EU, a Parliament with responsibility for immigration policy, so that overseas staff working in our NHS are not threatened with deportation, a Parliament with control over Scotland's vast energy resources, so that we can accelerate our journey to net zero and the decarbonisation of our society and our economy, but also raise our productivity and improve our competitiveness. Full self-government, so that our actions to take more children out of poverty, from the Scottish Child Payment to the vital work to ensure public services are joined up and are delivering whole family support, are not hampered by the choices made elsewhere. You'll be asking later, how distant is net zero? Well, if Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister, I would contend out of sight. Can Scotland meet its poverty targets? Challenging, with a Labour government at Westminster that is, as yet, unwilling to play its part in this endeavour. But if Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister, not a hope. That's why we need a Parliament with the power not only to change Scotland for the better, but also to protect Scotland from the worst. Because, as we can see from our experience in the last 26 years, self-government works for Scotland. Self-government suits Scotland. After the unprecedented triple blow of austerity, COVID and the inflation spike, self-government means that we have an NHS that is recovering, with waiting lists coming down, the number of GPs rising, and other key frontline staff like nurses going up. An extensive electrification of our rail network, land reform and the right to responsible access, expensive PFI replaced with a better value Scottish model, allowing a transformational rebuilding and renovation of our school estate. Mrs Thatcher's right to buy abolished, with the number of houses for social rent now once again increasing, child poverty rates falling, tech startups flourishing. Self-government works for Scotland, and that's why we need more of it. I applaud the work of IPPR and your aim to be a progressive think tank, challenging me and my government and all of us. And I ask, if we are a progressive nation, as I believe we are, what are we doing, all of us, to make sure that our progressive vision and values are truly protected? To make sure that our pathway is the one that we have chosen and not the one that others choose for us. What comes next for Scotland? Our nation faces a choice as real as the one we faced in the 80s and the 90s. Our answer then was a parliament, and today we need to do more, because the best chance to echo IPPR Scotland's founding mission of making the Scotland of tomorrow even better than the Scotland of today is, in my view, to put Scotland's future into Scotland's hands, to choose the fresh start that is EU membership as an independent nation state, and to use the golden combination of EU membership, independence, and low-cost energy to fuel the Scotland of tomorrow and to address some of the crippling problems that we are determined to solve here in Scotland, but we need the powers to enable us to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, First Minister. First Minister has kindly agreed to take a few questions now. We'll take one from Douglas Fraser at the BBC to start with, and then and any other media outlet that wants to chime in, please do, and as many questions from the floor as we can fit in as well. So, Douglas, you first.
First Minister, thank you for that. We've heard already this morning about huge gaps opening up in the next 5 years between expenditure, the trajectory of expenditure, and the projected funds that are going to be available to the Scottish Parliament. We've also heard that there's a need for a frank and honest conversation with the public about the choices that brings. When are you going to start that frank and honest conversation?
I would contend that we started it a long time ago, Douglas, and its most recent iteration of it was the medium-term financial strategy that was set out to Parliament in June, alongside the population health framework and the public service reform strategy that we set out. Because if you look at those three documents together, you will see the agenda of reform that the government is taking forward to, within the population health framework, make that further decisive shift to early intervention to reduce the crisis demand on the health service, evidenced yesterday by the agreement with the BMA Scotland General Practice Committee about future funding of the general practice, which was warmly welcomed yesterday and which I think indicates the focused commitment of the government to make that decisive shift to early intervention, as one example. Plus the steps that we're taking on public service reform, where we've acknowledged that there is going to have to be a reduction in public sector headcount. It's inevitable in ensuring that we support the delivery of public services in the years to come. And the work that is underway within the medium-term financial strategy to support the sustainability of public services by improving economic opportunity and investment. So, and all of these elements will influence the budget, the infrastructure investment plan and the spending review, which are published in January. So all of that is the honest conversation. But I think the other bit of the honest conversation is what I've shared with you today, that we are facing increasingly challenging headwinds from the actions of a UK government, and I'm being very candid with people. I think the headwinds that are coming from Westminster are deeply unsettling in the years to come, which will threaten some of the things, that the foundations that really matter to people in Scotland. And unless we have the control over our lives through independence, then I think those decisions will be essentially taken for us by the actions of a hostile Westminster government, and we see plenty of those.
Okay, thank you very much, Douglas. Can I just ask you briefly, when you talk about headwinds at Westminster, Reform UK are not just polling strongly in England, they're polling very strongly here too. What responsibility do you take for governing in Scotland in such a way that so many people, certainly according to the IPPR poll here, are apparently so scunnered with over-promising and under-delivery and everything else that they're intending to vote for them?
I think what's driving the issues around about reform in Scotland are frustrations about standard of living. I think that's, if you look at all of the data, demonstrates that people's standard of living has been flat as a pancake since the financial crash in 2008.
It's not just standard of living, it's NHS is right at the top.
Yes, and what's the government doing about it? The government is now reducing waiting lists. We had a COVID pandemic. It has given us a backlog of NHS cases to be dealt with. I am relentlessly focused every week. Yesterday I had the NHS leadership review, which happens on a weekly basis, where I am pressurising and scrutinising to make as much headway as we can on NHS waiting lists and waiting times, and we are now seeing the fruits of that, and we're seeing the increase in capacity with general practice. So there are certain things that are within our control, but for which I take full responsibility for these things. People can judge my government on its performance. But there are certain things that are not in our control, and that is about people's standards of living. Because the prevailing failure of the United Kingdom government to stimulate improved standards of living, which of course has been exacerbated by decisions that Scotland did not consent to around Brexit or austerity, and the effects of these factors in our society, are reasons why I think we've got to have a stronger constitutional settlement to protect us.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we have a question, please? One at the front. Could you stand up? We'll get a microphone to you. Could you stand up and give your name and organisation, if that's relevant? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, First Minister. Hannah Byrne here from the Herald. Can you expand a wee bit on your remarks around why reform in particular is, I guess, a fiscal threat to Scotland? You know, polling from the Herald has recently showed that they're going to get potentially 22 MSPs in Scotland. There's loads and loads of people who are potentially going to vote for this party. How are they a fiscal threat?
Well, they're a fiscal threat to Scotland. They're also a power threat to Scotland. I don't believe for one moment that a reform-led government in the United Kingdom will be a benign force in relation to the powers of the Scottish Parliament. Nigel Farage has made it absolutely clear he holds the Scottish Parliament in contempt, and he doesn't support the concept of devolution. His colleagues regularly espouse the importance of getting rid of the Scottish Parliament. So there's your existential threat from reform. So therefore, if we want to, and the whole thrust of my speech is that self-government since 1999 has given Scotland the ability to choose a different path. I think it's done that, and it's done that across administrations of different colours. You know, I applaud. You know, I've just come back from a trip to Malawi and Zambia, where I was applauding the leadership of Jack McConnell 20 years ago in creating the International Development Programme. I think it's been a huge benefit for Scotland and for the Global South. Free personal care for the elderly, another achievement of the Labour Liberal Executive. I applaud these things. Many things have happened under our government's term in office, the Scottish Child Payment, the abolition of tuition fees at universities. Very different paths been taken here in Scotland. That's under threat by what lies ahead, because there is, we're already seeing that with the Internal Market Act eroding the powers of the Parliament. That's been put in place by a hostile Conservative government. It's not been taken away by a Labour government that opposed the Internal Market Act. And we've got the prospect of a Farage reform government which will be hostile to Scottish self-government. And we've got to be alert to it and alive to it and have something and an alternative to tackle it.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Another question. Yes. And then there.
Morning, First Minister. Mark McLaughlin from The Sun. It was reported this morning that Kate Forbes has told members in her constituency that the official line in the party is they have to stop talking about the SNP's plan for a separate currency. So why is the C word banned?
Well, that might be the case if I hadn't published about a 120-page document just a few weeks ago that talked about Scotland's currency as an independent state. So that's a topic that's alive, well, talked about and thriving. So there's no need to worry, Mark, about that point.
I think the follow-up question was, is the Times story not true then?
Well, I'm afraid that one of the things that I'm not across is the contents of branch minutes of every SNP branch the length and breadth of the country. And with the greatest of respect and love and adoration to my party local organisation, I'm glad I'm not across all those minutes. So I'm just simply saying that we've just published a big document which has got all the explanation of the government's currency position, and it's there for people. I think you were actually there on the occasion that I launched the document, so it's there for all to see.
Okay, thank you. Question there, and then we'll go up to the back. Sorry?
Well,
yes. Sorry about that. We are.
That gives you even more entitlement to ask a question.
We'll get to actual normal people now.
So, Elke Heinz, University of Edinburgh. The Scottish Government is nominally a well-being economy government. So why are we still talking about this old narrative of growth, and why do you cite, for example, Ireland and its lowering of corporation taxes as a model to follow?
Let me say, I was simply citing the example of Ireland of where they lowered corporation tax to fuel their economy. The proposition I was putting forward is that Scotland has an opportunity for low-cost renewable energy to fuel our economy, which I think would be a much more sustainable contribution to a well-being economy. And I think when I talk about, there's a great danger in government that the discussion and the conversation sort of is taken forward in a sort of compartmentalised fashion. There are four big priorities at the heart of my government's agenda: eradicating child poverty, growing the economy, successfully delivering a just transition to net zero, and strengthening our public services. Now, the danger of my articulation of that in that fashion is that audiences think that's four separate compartments. For me, that's not the case. These are interconnected features. If I can't stimulate economic growth and economic opportunity in Scotland, then we will not generate the wealth to enable us to eradicate child poverty or to improve our public services or to fund the transition to net zero. So I hope, in looking at the rounded policy position of the government, there is acknowledgement of the emphasis that I place on improving lives, life chances, opportunities for people, and the happiness and sustainability of our communities as a consequence of that rounded policy agenda of the government, which I think is consistent with the aspirations of a well-being economy.
Thank you. Up at the back there.
Good morning, First Minister. It's Chris McCall at the Daily Record.
Oh, sorry, everybody.
So you'll be delighted to hear from
me. Very welcome.
Polling for IPPR that was out today suggests that almost half of Scots, that's 47%, think that taxes are already too high in Scotland. And with that in mind, could you rule out further income tax rises at the next Holyrood budget in January?
Well, we've said that there won't be any changes to income tax in the remainder of this Parliament. So the Finance Secretary made that commitment at the budget last December. So I'm very happy to reinforce that point today. I acknowledge the polling from IPPR Scotland. I think what also I have to acknowledge is the fact that if we didn't have the additional revenue generated by the tax changes that we have made, we would not be able to support the investments in public policy that we have made. And Douglas Fraser's question to me a moment ago asked about the sustainability question of public finances, and part of my answer would be that we have taken steps through the changes to tax that we've made that have enabled us to make those commitments to people and to deliver on expectations. But I do acknowledge that there are limitations to the tax changes that can be made, particularly within the limitations of the devolved context, because the Chancellor is wrestling with significant economic challenges in the budget in late November, but there's a much broader range of choices that she has at her available, which are not available to ministers in the Scottish Government. But I can assure you that we will be looking carefully at all of the implications of that budget in relation to the formulation of our own plans and priorities.
Thank you. Anybody who is not a journalist, put your hand up. Yes, thank you. And then there, and then there.
Good morning, First Minister. My name is Brian Scott of the Poverty Trade Community, and I'm not a journalist. I've got many friends in England who are living in fear and trepidation due to the welfare reforms proposed for down there. Can I ask what the Scottish Government is doing about protecting the people who are on the adult disability payment and other benefits in Scotland?
Thanks, Brian. First of all, I do welcome questions from journalists, so please don't.
No, that was I could say that because I.
Well, you've had a fairly long-standing commitment to the profession, Sally. It's a very serious point, Brian, because I understand. I see constituents. One of the great privileges of representative democracy is that the First Minister sits across a table from his constituents that he's represented for nearly 3 decades, and I hear the anxiety and the concern that members of the public have about the future of their financial support where they have no other options. And part of when we legislated for the establishment of Social Security Scotland and taken forward our social security responsibilities, we said that we would act within a context of dignity and respect for individuals. And I think that's perhaps the best way I can answer your question by saying to you that those will be the underpinning, that the law requires us to do that. And that's how we'll take forward our decision making in a compassionate way to recognise the challenges that individuals face and to ensure that they are supported. And the type of changes and reforms been made by the United Kingdom government, well, I'm not sure what they're going to end up looking like, because there is some turmoil around about those questions. But I think the best way for me to give you assurance is that the principles of dignity and respect will be absolutely at the heart of the way in which we take forward our implementation of adult disability payments and other social security benefits in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we had a question here, and then the lady behind you, if you'd like to pass to her.
Thank you, First Minister. I'm Emma Jackson, Citizens Advice Scotland. At the weekend, as you well know, 5,000 of us marched in Edinburgh to say Scotland demands better, both of the Scottish and indeed UK government, as far too many of us are feeling ignored and overlooked. Across the Citizens Advice Network in Scotland, we know that hundreds of thousands of people are facing multiple compounding issues. When someone comes into a bureau, when they're facing eviction, we know that there are issues with social security, with energy, with public debt. So much is going on in people's lives. And frankly, people don't really know whether it's a local government issue, a devolved or reserved issue. So I wonder, what does collaboration look like across local, national and UK government so that we can really deliver outcomes for people both now and in the future?
Thank you. And we might just take the next question as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. First Minister, Alison Watson, Shelter Scotland. I was interested in the conversation earlier about what is feeding the rise of the far right. And we conducted a number of workshops over the summer to try and understand what people who are affected by Scotland's housing emergency would like us to seek politicians to build into their manifestos. And one of the most striking things from all of those workshops was the amount of despair that people felt, that people didn't feel politicians were listening and they didn't feel confident that politicians would act. And given that we have had an Ending Homelessness Together plan, the joint plan from Scottish Government and COSLA since 2017, and that period has been marked by record rises in homelessness. We've got every 15 minutes another household in Scotland becomes homeless. How does the Scottish Government drive a response that's defined by confidence, drive a progressive response, when housing shortages are now becoming so weaponised by the far right and becoming an attack on vulnerable asylum seekers and refugees and becoming an attack on Scotland's world-leading housing rights?
Thanks very much.
In fact, there's a very clear relationship between the two questions, so let me consider them together. First of all, I welcome the march that took place on Saturday, and I think I acknowledge the importance of the issues that have been raised and the plea for action and intervention, and I hear that, and it underpins what I'm trying to do as First Minister. I think you talked, Emma, about multiple compounding difficulties, and in a sense, that analysis, I accept that analysis, which is why I end up at whole family support. So, during COVID, families did not have to go from pillar to post to provide assistance. In the context of a national emergency, public authorities lined up with families. And I know from my own constituency experience, which always shapes how you think, families received basically, one element of support from the local authority, grouping together everything that could be happened to get them through that period. That's why I'm putting such emphasis on whole family support, because if people are in difficulty, financial difficulty, and invariably financial difficulty fuels an awful lot of other difficulties in life, it's not a surprise that people end up bewildered, exhausted, worn out by trying to resolve the issues. So whole family support is critical to get alongside people. Now, that's been a major theme of my leadership over the last 18 months. We had a huge gathering in Glasgow a few weeks ago. And I took a lot of heart from that, because I began to see a systemic understanding and appreciation and participation in the delivery of whole family support. It's different parts of the country, and I think I'm sort of learning a lesson to say, well, maybe you should just kind of allow that. Just don't try to sort of get some national elegance around these things. Just be assured that whole family support exists in different communities, because that way we will be in a much better position to support families to navigate their way out of difficulties. I visited a GP practice in the East End of Glasgow a few months ago, and they had a family link worker working with a GP practice. And one of the GPs told me that he had noticed that people who were habitually coming to see him as a GP had stopped coming to see him, because at one stage he'd refer them to the family link worker. And the family link worker had basically gone alongside the family and sorted out housing, addiction, transport, childcare, and finance. And those individuals were now not coming to the GP as frequently because life was more orderly, it had more structure to it and more support. So that's where my direction of thinking is going. Now, if you look at the central mission of the government, which is about eradicating child poverty, I'm facing a situation just now, notwithstanding my answer to Brian a moment ago about being uncertain about where the UK government's going to end up. But on their current plans, child poverty will rise, and I'm trying to get it to fall. And we're getting it to fall. We've got lowest child poverty in 3 decades in Scotland today. We're the only part of the United Kingdom where child poverty is falling, principally because of interventions like the child payment and the early learning and childcare support and some of the Sure Start support, the Best Start work that we're putting in place. All of these measures are having an effect. But if the UK government takes actions that increase child poverty, surely we've got to do something about that. So you asked me, what does alignment between Westminster Government, Scottish Government and local government look like? I'm increasingly confident about alignment between the Scottish Government and local government. My local authority colleagues are on the same page on this journey. But they'll be wrestling, just as I'll be wrestling, with being dragged in the other direction by ironically, a UK Labour government that looks to me as if it's going to allow child poverty to rise.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time a bit. If you could
And
just address
I've got to get Alison as well. And Alison, I think obviously, I completely see the weaponisation of this issue is underway, and I've been pressed to roll back on the homelessness legislation that Scotland has put in place to deal with the situation. I won't do that. I think it's the wrong course of action to take, because we came to the conclusions around the homelessness legislation for all the right reasons. What we have to do is we have to have a range of different interventions. We have to act swiftly to improve housing supply. So the steps that we've taken to increase the investment in taking accommodation out of voids and to bring properties into use is having an effect. It's one tool. That's a short-term measure that we can take. We spent 40 million on that last year. We're doing 80 million this year. We've got over 2,000 properties have come into use as a consequence. Obviously, the house building programme, I know how you feel about the decisions that were taken in the last financial year. This financial year it's stronger, so we've got better foundations, and we've given long-term commitment to housing supply infrastructure. And the other thing specifically on the situation around asylum seekers is that we need an orderliness to our relationship with the Home Office about the management of this issue, and there is disorderliness. And we've been making this plea. Glasgow City Council has been at the epicentre of making this plea to the Home Office, and I hope there is an acknowledgement of the significance and the seriousness of these points.
First Minister, thank you very much for tackling all these questions so graciously. Please join me in thanking John Swinney now.